Latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates.
Hello and welcome to the Gist on Strat News Global. Good evening, I am Surya Gangadharan and our focus is on Ukraine. Let me give you a quick recap of the developments so far. I have a small graphic coming up for you. Russia has attacked key Ukrainian cities, Kharkiv, Kiev, and Lviv. Missiles have been used to neutralize military and air bases. That's what the Russians are saying. Russia also says no civilian populations will be targeted. And there's been condemnation from Europe and, of course, the US. I have with me from Vienna, Velina Tchakarova. She's director of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. She's been on our channel before. Welcome, Velina. Glad to have you. How long do you expect these operations to continue, and what exactly does President Putin intend to achieve?
Well, first, it's really hard to tell how long this military operation will last, given the the quickly developing situation on the ground. Let me first stress that military attack, a invasion of Ukraine by Russia has been anticipated since the last 2 months. The unprecedented military escalation along the Ukrainian border, placing 75% of the armed forces of Russia, more than 190,000 troops along the borders, but also meanwhile in Belarus was indicative of the intentions by the Russian president. And since this morning, European Central Time, Russian president made it very clear that it's going to be a military operation in eastern Ukraine, specifically focusing on the two regions, Donetsk and Lugansk. But what we are actually observing is a full-scale military attack at the moment. So obviously, the intentions may change over the course of the military operation. What is clear, so basically what are the goals? First, of course, subjugation of the Ukrainian state, political elite, and basically that would mean a clear violation of all international law norms, specifically when it comes to the territorial integrity of the country. It's a casus belli since this morning, European time. Second, the goal of Putin is for Ukraine to never, ever enter, that means join the North Atlantic Alliance, NATO, but also probably there will be a push for an official recognition of a neutrality status. The complete demilitarization of the country is also on the agenda. And finally, so basically, also in addition to that, there will be an official announced by Ukraine that Crimea is part of Russia. And of course, in the longer run, the two regions, Donetsk and Lugansk, will likely be annexed by Russia as well.
Mm-hmm. And all this while NATO has anticipated this and has done nothing.
Well, in fact, it was obvious right from the start that there will be no military involvement or participation by NATO members or by any European member states. This was very clear right from the start, and even today the Secretary General of NATO confirmed once again that NATO is not going to get militarily involved, NATO members. However, there will be military support. There will be military assistance to Ukraine. Ukraine is currently fighting back and will not surrender without a fight. And I suppose that this defense assistance is going to continue. And next to it, there will be and additionally, there will be troops deployment by NATO member states along the eastern flank, which borders Ukraine and is basically the line, the borderline, so to say, between NATO members and the Russian Federation.
Mm-hmm. Do you believe the Ukrainians overplayed their hand?
Well, in fact, it is absolutely clear that this was a blatant military attack by Russia, and it was unprovoked military reinvasion. Ukraine has been in a situation of undeclared war with Russia since 2014. Since then, more than 14,000 people fell victim to the insurgency and tensions, military tensions in eastern Ukraine, in these two regions, Donetsk and Luhansk. And in a sense, in this particular situation, Ukraine is the victim of a military aggression in a very unprovoked manner.
Mm-hmm. You know, there is an argument which I've been hearing that this situation suits the Americans and it suits the Russians, because Russia has now got Ukraine under some kind of control, and they've diffused the challenge they were facing. The Americans have got Europe solidly behind them, and therefore they can now focus on, they've managed to isolate Russia, so they can now focus on the Indo-Pacific, on China. Does this make sense?
There is also a counter argument that I would like to present, and that is that first and foremost, Biden made it very clear that United States will not get militarily involved. There will be midterms elections on November 8th this year, and it's very important election for the Democrats to not lose places to the Republicans, given that in 2 years there will be a presidential election once again. And in a sense, some of the statements of the American president were a kind of a door opener for aggressive actions by Russia. Then again, of course, we can argue that in the long run, probably the reading of the Russian president is correct, unfortunately, and that is that there is going to be an American retreat from the old continent, given that the systemic competition with China is going to take place predominantly in the Indo-Pacific realm. And of course, given these circumstances, were also the very specific position of Russia, and that was not only about United States but also about China. So on the one hand, Russia presented its red line, and that is sphere of influence in Eastern Europe, the possibility to decide over the fate of other sovereign states when it comes to Russian security interests and also geopolitical interests. And basically this red line, these were the almost impossible conditions by Russia, which were presented to United States and NATO. Of course, the expectation was that they would have never been negotiated. But on the other hand, at the very same time, because we need to put it into a geopolitical context, there was also this unprecedented approximation with China. The joint declaration from February 4th, the diplomatic boost when the Russian president went for the opening of the Olympic Games, and the very fact that actually Putin waited until the Olympic Games were over on February 20. And if you look at the time frame when the military operation was launched, it makes sense that there was also a kind of unwritten settlement also with China to provide diplomatic boost for the Olympic Games, given the isolation by the most of the European countries and also by the United States during the Olympics. And then again, of course, knowing that China will diplomatically back Russia's position, which we are already observing. It was a very weak diplomatic statement by the Chinese MFA today, basically even dismissing the idea of invasion, whereas, as I stated, this is not even an invasion, this is a re-invasion, because Russia invaded Ukraine already in 2014 and took parts of the territory in this year. So if you take this systemic dimension of the global affairs, what I have been observing is a clear sign of Russia's repositioning in the long game. So basically by trying on the one side to place conditions for possible concessions to the Americans, and it was throughout these 2 months was only about talks with Biden and talks with the United States first and foremost, and not about the Europeans. But then again, given also this dragon bear approximation with China, there is, of course, a geopolitical window of opportunity, and Putin used it.
Now, Ukraine is fighting back. Do you, and Putin has said he has no intentions of occupying, although you can disagree with that because he anticipates there'll be some kind of an insurgency or whatever. Do you think this is going to now spread, spill over, or it's still early? It's still early in the game.
First, we should not take any statements by the Russian president at face value. Second, there is still this worst case scenario of occupation, full-scale invasion and occupation. It is possible, but I don't consider it being likely. Even now, under the circumstances of a full-scale military attack, I don't really consider this scenario of occupation of Ukraine for realistic. We are talking about a large European country with 42 million people, and it is beyond any reasonable sense that 190,000 Russian troops will actually enable an occupation of 42 million people in the long run. Now, when we talk about further intentions, as I said, since things are currently very fluid on the ground, the imminent goals of the military operation may change. We may even witness another worst case scenario, which would be a regime change, installing a puppet regime in Kiev, which will be loyal to Russia and the Russian interests. When we look at the whole region, the Eastern European region, well, in fact, Russia is already involved in all 6 countries in the region in one way or another. There have been frozen conflicts. These are conflicts with a low intensity where from time to time things got escalated. Let me remind you that Russia has been involved in most of them. Either it has military presence, so-called peacekeeping troops in some of them, like in the case of Transnistria, which is near Moldova, or and of course is now also and is bordering Ukraine, and of course presents even bigger risk now, given that a full-scale military attack might further continue. But then we have also the situation with Belarus, and once again a completely different situation in the last several months, where meanwhile Russian troops remained on the ground following the Belarus-Russian military drills, and in fact have no intention of leaving the country, where there will be a constitutional referendum, and we might even witness a situation where Belarus will actually witness a completely new geopolitical situation of approximation with Russia. And then we have Georgia, once again, two republics which Russia actually helped secede from the country, permanently creeping borders of Georgia with Russia's help, now Ukraine. So in fact, and the last two, of course, republics, Azerbaijan and Armenia, backed by Russia, there is military presence also in Azerbaijan following the war. You see that actually Russia is already there, and it has no intention of leaving.
So tell me, what would be the sentiment in Europe at this point? Given how nobody seems bothered.
Well, on an emotional level, of course, the outrage is absolutely undescribable. Of course, the member states, the European member states, are all supportive of Ukraine's position, with a few exceptions in Europe. And these exceptions, of course, are only at the level of certain political elites. There is zero understanding and zero acceptance for what Russia did to Ukraine. So in a sense, I think that a lot of the so-called Russia-friendly member states, because some of them were actually pursuing also rapprochements with Moscow, so geopolitical rapprochements, normalization of the relations. Just 2 years ago, France launched such rapprochement, such kind of approximation. Germany has been actually in a situation of geo-economic approximation for many years. The new gas pipeline was just about to be launched, the Nord Stream 2.0. Italy has very strong trade interests. But now, following these events, there is a clear shift in the mood. And even the political elites are right now siding to 100% with the Ukrainian cause.
So how does this play out in the Indo-Pacific? One argument is that the US is now free to focus on the Indo-Pacific and China. How do you see this?
I agree with you, and I think this is, as I said, the long game. The long game is going to be played out in the Indo-Pacific, of course, with direct repercussions for Russia, for United States, for China, and increasingly for India. So I think that Russia is also trying to, as I said, upgrade on the one side, upgrade its positions in Europe. It wants to shape the fate of the European security architecture. It wants to actually create new rules of the game, but it also wants to close this chapter by determining the destiny of Ukraine. It is going to set an example for other states in Europe, what kind of retaliatory measures Moscow could introduce if Russian interests are at stake. But the Russian game is also increasingly turning to Eurasia. That means Central Asia, increasingly South Asia. And Moscow is also seeking for geopolitical corridors to get an access to the Indian Ocean. So in a sense, it is already sensing that, of course, the systemic rivalry between China and the United States is going to predominantly take place in the Indian Ocean, in the Indo-Pacific area, and also in East Asia. And of course, that is linked to the American retreat from the old continent I was pointing to in the long run. When exactly this is going to happen, we don't have a clear answer to this question. It may take another 10 years, it may take 20 years from now, but the objective systemic processes and trends point to this direction. And in this long game, Russia wants to play the role of a free rider. Russia thinks that neither United States nor China will be able to win a systemic competition against each other without Russia's participation. And at the same time, none of the two systemic rivals want to see Russia being part of the other's geopolitical bloc. It's a very complicated situation.
And would you presume that the pressure on India is going to mount from the Americans going forward?
Absolutely. I mean, India needs to, we have already observed, of course, a very careful diplomatic stance given the military escalation. The statement by India also at the first UN Security Council meeting. Russia is a long-term traditional and very stable strategic partner of India. India wants to see Russia playing more active role in the Indo-Pacific because of China. At the very same time, New Delhi is very worried about the dragon bear, about this modus vivendi of systemic coordination between Moscow and Beijing. And for India to remain non-aligned country, which is in the DNA, in the geopolitical DNA, is going to be increasingly difficult. So some tough decisions are going to be put on the table. How close this relationship with the United States will look like? Will it be a strategic alliance? There are already some trends pointing to this direction. India is part of the Quad. India is looking carefully at the AUKUS Security and Defense Pact. Japan is meanwhile also trying to be more active and, if possible, enter the AUKUS. And then, of course, it will be up to New Delhi to navigate through this very complex geopolitical context and environment. But one thing is very clear. All relevant players, and I consider India as being en route to become third world's economic power in this or probably in the next decade. So the role of India in the global order is going to change immensely. And I think, so I argue actually that all relevant geopolitical players will be confronted with either or choice at some point amid this bifurcation of the global system. So we are not in the situation of a multipolarity any longer. And as I said, the European security order and the international security order from the last 30 years period after the Cold War is, in my view, over. So we are now in a completely transitionary period of the international relations, and the way how the relevant powers are going to forge new alliances, partnerships, and are going to navigate this very insecure period is going to be very, very much decisive for their future and their place in the global order.
So last question, would you say India still has the luxury of choice of being able to move with the Americans sometimes, with the Russians at other times? Is that choice still there?
Absolutely. So I anticipate strategic approximation between United States and India, given the rapprochement between China and Pakistan, and also the unprecedented dragon bear rapprochement between Moscow and Beijing, which almost nobody has foreseen, and has been in the making for well, at least since 2014, following the previous military invasion of Ukraine. So this rapprochement, the dragon bear, is going to deepen. The economic dependence of Pakistan on China is going to deepen. And this, of course, close a lot of geo-economic space for India. And that would mean, of course, that India would need to be very creative. I would not exclude a normalization of trade and economic ties even with Pakistan, because Pakistan is increasingly being squeezed. by China. Then again, as I said, I don't think that India would consider deteriorating relations with Moscow, because Moscow is rather neutral in the tensions between New Delhi and Beijing, and also can help facilitate diplomatic ties between these two Asian giants. And finally, as I said, there are a lot of important spheres of synergy between United States and India in the long run. Who is going to ride the fourth industrial revolution? India has a lot of leverage to offer to Washington, and Washington knows very well that it cannot win this competition with China on its own. It's going to need credible and serious partners. And here on the old continent, there is the big risk, from my view, that we are turning into something what I call a geopolitical backyard of the global affairs, continent that is no longer able to decide over its own fate.
So as they say, we live in interesting times. Velina Tchakarova, pleasure talking to you. Thank you very much for that perspective.
Thank you for the invitation.
And for all of you out there who are following this conversation, thank you for your observations. Keep following our programs as we go forward. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and do follow us on Twitter and Instagram. Thank you very much. Good night.